When my mom gave my entire inheritance to my golden boy brother, I thought it was over for me, but a hidden bank account, a decades-old family secret, and a fake will changed everything. This story is full of betrayal, suspense, and a twist ending you won't see coming. I always knew my family was a little messed up. I mean, every family's got their issues, right? But I swear I never expected to be sitting on the front porch of my childhood home holding a letter from my mom's lawyer that basically told me I was worth nothing to her, not in words exactly, but when your mom leaves everything to your older brother and you get a $500 Walmart gift card and a crocheted blanket, yeah, the message is pretty damn clear, and what really gets me is, I was the one who took care of her the last 3 years of her life. I was the one who cleaned up her bedpans when her kidneys started failing, who drove her to every single appointment, who left my job and moved back in after my divorce fell apart just so she wouldn't have to die alone, and she repaid me by giving the entire house, the money in the bank, the car, and even the antique ring from Grandma Lorraine to my brother Mason, the same brother who didn't even show up until she was in hospice, who called maybe once every 3 months just to ask how things were going and if she was still hanging on. And when I opened that letter from the lawyer, I actually thought it was a mistake at first, like maybe they mixed up the names or addresses or something, but no, it had my name on it, spelled correctly, and it said very clearly that all remaining assets of our mother's estate were to be transferred to Mason Thomas Reynolds, and I got this tight, sour feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake, not because I wanted the money or the stuff, hell, I'd been broke before, I could be broke again, but because I had believed, deep down, despite all the signs, that she loved me more than that, and the worst part is, when I confronted Mason about it, he had the nerve to act surprised, like, wow, I didn't know she did that, I thought she was splitting it, and then he shrugged and said, well, she must have had her reasons, and walked off like he didn't just kick me in the chest with that smug little smile he always used when he got away with something, and I swear to you, I went inside and screamed into a pillow until my throat burned, and for a few days I walked around like a ghost, still cooking in that kitchen, still folding the sheets, still watering the stupid ferns she made me promise to keep alive, even though the house wasn't even mine anymore. I don't know why I didn't just leave. Maybe part of me wanted to hold on to the little crumbs she left behind, but everything changed the day I was cleaning out the top shelf of the linen closet, the one where she used to keep the guest towels wrapped in lavender soap, and I found this shoebox taped to the underside of the shelf, and inside were 10 neatly stacked bank statements and a handwritten letter addressed to someone named Margaret, and I didn't recognize the name, but I recognized the handwriting. It was my mom's, and the first sentence of the letter started with, if you're reading this, then you found the truth. I've hidden for too long, and my heart stopped because that's the kind of sentence that only leads to more questions, and boy did it ever, because what followed was a confession that blew the lid off everything I thought I knew about my family. She wrote about how she'd been hiding money for years, funneling it into a private account that Mason didn't know about, how she regretted a decision she made in 1987 that she never told anyone about, and that she hoped Margaret would forgive her, and my brain was spinning trying to piece together what the hell she meant, and when I went through those bank statements, my jaw dropped because the account had over $320,000 in it and had been getting monthly deposits even after she stopped working, and I was just sitting there on the floor, papers in my lap, this weird mix of rage and shock crawling up my spine, because that account wasn't mentioned anywhere in the will, not a single word about it, and suddenly a part of me thought, maybe she really didn't want Mason to have it, maybe this was meant for someone else, maybe, just maybe, this money wasn't stolen from me, maybe it was stolen from someone else, and that's when I started digging, because if my mom had secrets, and if Mason somehow ended up with everything, I was going to find out why, and I was going to find out what the hell happened in 1987 that made her hide money in the first place. I didn't know it yet, but that one dusty shoebox in the closet was the first thread. And once I pulled it, the whole sweater unraveled. So after I found the shoebox and read that letter to Margaret, I couldn't sleep, not a wink. I just kept lying there on the couch staring at the ceiling fan going around and around like it was supposed to make sense of anything. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I really knew about my mom before I was born. Like, yeah, I knew she used to be a nurse, and I knew she met my dad at some community dance back in the late 70s, and they got married fast because she got pregnant with Mason, and they did the whole shotgun wedding routine and bought the house on Pine Street where I'm still living now. But that whole part of her life, the years before I came along, felt like some foggy part of a movie I missed the beginning of, and it started to bother me in a way I couldn't shake. Like, who was this Margaret? Why did my mom say she regretted something in 1987, And how the hell had she managed to stash away $320,000 in an account no one knew about? I mean, that takes planning, purpose, secrecy, and as much as I hate to say it, my mom was good at secrets, and the more I looked into the account, the more suspicious it got, because I called the bank. It was a credit union actually, and I pretended to be her. Don't judge me, I was desperate, and the lady on the phone said the account had been active since 1989, which was already strange because she had quit working around 1995 to stay home full-time, and when I asked about the deposits, she said they were private pension transfers, and I was like, excuse me, my mom didn't have a pension, she worked hourly at a clinic, barely got benefits, what pension are you talking about? But the lady clammed up fast and told me she couldn't share more unless I had power of attorney, which I didn't, because Mason had that too. Of course he did. And that's when it hit me, Mason didn't even know about this account, and if he did, he would have drained it by now, so I took it on myself to find out who Margaret was. And it didn't take long because I remembered we had one of those old metal filing cabinets in the garage with all the family records in it, and sure enough buried in the back was a manila envelope labeled 1987 adoption correspondence, and my hands started shaking so bad I almost dropped it. And inside was a copy of an adoption application my mom had filed through a private attorney named Gerald L. Snipes, and attached to it was a photograph of a baby girl wrapped in a pale yellow blanket with a name scribbled on the back, Margaret Grace Reynolds, born July 2, 1987, and suddenly everything clicked in a horrible, gut-wrenching way. My mom had another daughter, a whole other child that she gave up, and never told a soul about, not me, not Mason, no one, and that letter in the shoebox wasn't for me. It was for her, for Margaret, for the sister I never knew I had, and I don't even know how to describe how that made me feel. Like part of me was angry and part of me was hollowed out and part of me wanted to cry and scream at the same time, because how could she hide something that big? How could she go to her grave with that kind of secret just tucked away in a linen closet? And then I started wondering, was the money meant for Margaret? Was that what the letter meant? Was she trying to make amends? And if so, what the hell was I supposed to do about it? Because now I had this account and this photo and this clue to a person I had never met but apparently shared blood with, and I swear to God, it was like something snapped in my brain and suddenly I couldn't do anything else until I found her. I didn't care what Mason thought, I didn't care that the house wasn't legally mine anymore. I went straight to that garage, pulled out the folder with the lawyer's name, and looked him up. Turns out he was long retired but still alive, living in a retirement community about an hour away, so I drove down the very next morning, didn't even call first, just showed up and asked if he remembered working with my mom in 1987, and he looked at me like I was a ghost, and he said, "You must be Nora," and I swear my heart stopped, because how the hell did he know my name? And he told me he wasn't supposed to talk about it, that he promised my mom confidentiality, but when I showed him the letter and the shoebox and told him she was gone, he finally gave in and told me everything. That my mom had gotten pregnant by someone who wasn't my dad, that she was terrified Mason would find out, that she told everyone she was visiting her sister in Ohio for a few months and quietly gave birth at a private clinic, handed the baby over to a couple from Illinois who were willing to do it all under the table, no agencies, no records, just hush-hush and done, and my mom made him promise to keep it buried, and I sat there on the little floral couch in the retirement home lobby just shaking, like the floor had dropped out from under me, because this wasn't just a secret, this was a whole second life, a part of her I never even glimpsed, and it made me wonder what else I didn't know. And the worst part, the part that kept me up for nights after, was that I started to wonder if Mason did know, if maybe the reason she gave him everything in the will was because he knew the truth and she was trying to keep him quiet, and that idea rooted deep in my brain and wouldn't let go, and that was the moment I realized I had to find Margaret, not just because it was the right thing to do, not just because maybe that money belonged to her, but because she might be the only person left who could help me understand who my mom really was, and I didn't even know where to start. But I had a name, a date of birth, and one grainy photograph, and I swore to myself right then and there that I would find her even if it took the rest of my life, and what I didn't know was that finding her would unravel everything, the money, the lies, the will, and eventually lead me right back to Mason, only this time I'd be the one holding the power. So now I had the name, the birthday, and that one photo of a baby girl who would have been my sister, and I started diving into every corner of the internet I could think of. I tried Facebook, Instagram, old adoption forums, ancestry sites, even one of those genealogy DNA services. I mailed in my sample and waited, checking my email obsessively like I was waiting on a lottery ticket to come through, And in the meantime, I kept that shoebox locked in my bedroom closet, the irony not lost on me. One hidden box replacing another, and it felt like my entire sense of self was shifting under my feet, like every time I took a breath I was rethinking every memory of my mom, every half-story she ever told, every strange look or weird silence that used to pass between her and Mason. And speaking of Mason, he started getting weirdly friendly all of a sudden, like one day he shows up at the house with a coffee and says, "Hey, figured you'd want one," and I looked at him like he had two heads. Because this man hadn't bought me a coffee since we were teenagers, and he starts asking how I'm doing, if I'm feeling okay, if I've had time to go through mom's things just to get closure, and it felt off, way off, like he was sniffing around, like he knew I'd found something, and I played dumb. I smiled and said, "Yeah, I've been tossing old sheets and junk from the garage, boring stuff," and he nodded, but I saw his eyes flick toward the hallway where the linen closet was, and something in my gut twisted tight, like a warning bell. And that night I moved the shoebox to my car and locked it in the trunk. I wasn't taking any chances, and a few days later I finally got a ping on my Ancestry account, a partial match to someone named Grace R. Taylor, living in Chicago, born July 2, 1987, and my hands started shaking again, and I messaged her right away, said I believed we might be related and that my mother was Susan Reynolds, and I'll be honest, I didn't expect her to write back. I thought maybe she'd freak out or ignore it or block me. But less than 2 hours later she sent back a message that said, "I've been waiting for this my whole life," and I just sat there staring at it, like I didn't know whether to cry or scream or laugh. And we messaged for hours, back and forth, and it turns out she always knew she was adopted. Her parents had been honest with her about that, but they didn't know much about my mom, just that she was young and scared and wanted the baby to have a better life, and she said she'd always wondered who she really was, and when we finally talked on the phone the next day, I swear it felt like talking to someone I already knew. Her voice even had a rhythm that reminded me of my mom's when she was younger, before she got bitter and quiet, and I told her everything, about the will, the house, the shoebox, the letter, the hidden account, and when I mentioned Mason her voice went stiff and she asked me to repeat his name, and I said, "Mason Reynolds," and she goes silent for a second and then says, "That's the name of the man who reached out to me 5 years ago," and I swear my heart dropped into my shoes. She told me that a guy claiming to be her biological brother found her through an old college alumni page and sent her a message asking if she wanted to know more about her birth family, said his mom had made mistakes and that she might be entitled to some kind of inheritance down the line, but then he ghosted her, never responded again, never followed up, and she assumed it was some kind of scam, but now she realized it was Mason, and my blood boiled because that meant he knew about her, he knew who she was, and I'd bet everything I had left that he knew about the money too, and suddenly it all made sense, why he'd been acting so weird lately, why he was suddenly popping by the house, because he knew mom left behind something that wasn't in the will and he was trying to get to it before I figured it out. But guess what, I'd already figured it out, and now I had Grace on my side, and we made a plan. She agreed to come down and meet me in person. She wanted to see the house, see where she would have grown up, and more importantly, she wanted to meet Mason face to face, so we arranged it like a trap. I told Mason I found something weird in the garage, some old paperwork mom had stashed, and that he should come by and take a look, and when he showed up, Grace was already inside, sitting in mom's old recliner with the shoebox in her lap, and Mason froze in the doorway like he'd seen a ghost, and she just looked at him and said, "Hi, remember me?" And I swear his face went pale, like actually white, and he stammered, trying to play dumb, but Grace shut him down cold, said she knew all about the message he sent her, the inheritance lie, the disappearing act, and I came in right behind her and dropped the folder from the garage onto the coffee table, the adoption papers, the letter from mom, everything, and then I told him I'd already spoken to mom's old attorney and we had legal grounds to contest the will, especially with proof that mom had hidden assets and a biological heir who wasn't named, and he lost it, started yelling about how he deserved everything because he was the firstborn, because he sacrificed his life to take care of mom. What a joke, and I snapped. I told him he hadn't done a damn thing except show up at the end and collect his prize, while I stayed and cleaned and cried and watched her slip away inch by inch, and I swear there was a moment where I thought he was going to hit something, maybe even me, but then Grace stood up and said something I'll never forget. She said, "You've already taken enough from this family, I won't let you take any more," and in that moment, it was like everything shifted, because suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. I had someone who understood the betrayal, the confusion, the rage, someone who had just as much right to be angry and hurt and fed up, and Mason stormed out, slammed the door so hard the window rattled, and I haven't heard from him since, but I know it's not over. I know he's going to try something, because that's what he does, but now it's different. Now I have Grace, and now we're going to fight back together. So after Mason stormed out, me and Grace just sat there in the silence, the kind of silence that sits heavy in your chest, like dust in a closed room, and I looked at her and she looked at me, and we both knew this wasn't just about the money anymore. It never really was. It was about what was taken from us, all those years apart, all the lies and silence and pain we both carried without knowing it came from the same root, and it felt like we were standing in the middle of a collapsed house, trying to figure out how to rebuild it with nothing but broken bricks and old memories. And over the next few days we talked more than I talked to anyone in years. She told me about growing up in Evanston with a quiet, loving mom who baked blueberry muffins every Saturday and a dad who taught her how to ride a bike without training wheels, and how she always knew there was something different, some hole in the middle of things that couldn't quite be filled. And I told her about our mom's casserole obsession and her terrible singing voice, and how she used to read me the same bedtime story every night for a year because I was too scared to let her change it. And we laughed and cried and shared pieces of the same woman from two completely different lifetimes, and it was beautiful and heartbreaking and surreal all at once. But the more we talked, the clearer it became that if we didn't act fast, Mason was going to make a move. And sure enough, just a week later we got a notice from the probate court that he had filed to execute the full will, no contest, claiming there were no unknown heirs, and my blood boiled because that meant he was trying to erase her, to legally wipe Grace out of existence, to take it all for himself before we had the chance to challenge it, and it was like he was daring us to fight him. So that's exactly what we did. We hired a lawyer named Angela, a tough-as-nails woman with silver hair and a stare that could melt steel, and the first thing she said when she saw the shoebox and the adoption papers and the DNA match printout was, "Oh honey, we've got him by the balls." And I knew then that we'd found the right person. Angela filed an injunction to pause the will's execution and started putting together a case to prove that not only had Grace been intentionally excluded from the inheritance, but that there was evidence of undue influence on Mason's part, especially since he'd reached out to her years earlier and then ghosted her, which showed he knew she existed and deliberately kept her in the dark. And once we got Angela on it, things started moving fast: depositions, court dates, paperwork flying back and forth like confetti at a doomed parade, and Mason, of course, played the victim, claimed I was manipulating everything out of jealousy, said Grace was probably a fraud, said Mom was just trying to protect her assets from a child she didn't know. And all of it made me sick, like physically ill, but Grace handled it like a champ, calm and clear and solid in her truth. And every time she showed up to court in her neat blazer and soft voice and unshakable poise, I saw the judge lean forward, I saw the jury listen closer, because she wasn't just some long-lost sister looking for a payday. She was a woman who had been lied to her entire life, and she wasn't angry, she was hurt, and people feel that, they believe that. And meanwhile Mason started slipping. First he missed a filing deadline, then he got caught lying about the message he sent Grace 5 years ago. Turns out she'd kept the screenshots, thank God. And when the judge saw that, his whole tone changed. Suddenly Mason wasn't the golden child anymore, he was a guy with a lot to lose and a lot to hide. And the final blow came when Angela subpoenaed the financial records on the hidden account, the one in Mom's name that he'd never disclosed. And it turned out he had tried to access it just 3 days after she died, but failed the identity check. And when they showed that in court, I saw his face drop, just sink into itself like wet paper, and the room went dead quiet, and the judge said something like, "It appears there has been a significant misrepresentation of the estate's assets," and I knew right then we'd won. And when the final ruling came down a few weeks later, it was like breathing fresh air after years of choking. The will was declared partially invalid due to excluded heirs and hidden financial accounts. The estate was to be divided equally between me and Grace, with legal fees to be paid by Mason. And I swear I could have danced right there in the courthouse parking lot, not because of the money, though yeah, it was a relief, but because we had made it. We had pulled the truth out of the shadows and put it in the light where it belonged. And after the ruling, Mason tried to call me, left this long voicemail about how he'd made mistakes, how he was sorry, how he wanted to talk things through, and for a second I almost felt bad, like maybe I should pick up and give him the closure he was pretending to want. But then I remembered all the years I spent cleaning up after Mom while he was off playing the prodigal son, all the lies, all the manipulation, and I deleted the message without listening to the end. And Grace, well, she asked if I wanted to go on a road trip, said she'd always wanted to see the Grand Canyon, and I looked around at the house I'd spent my whole life in, now finally mine, and I said, hell yes. and we packed up the car with snacks and a playlist and a printed photo of Mom in her younger days, and we drove west with the windows down and the sun on our faces, not to run away, but to finally move forward. And every mile we drove felt like healing, like building something new on top of the ruins. And I don't know what comes next, but I do know this: sometimes the family you lose makes room for the one you find, and sometimes the truth doesn't set you free all at once, but piece by piece, until one day, you look around and realize you're not carrying it alone anymore. It's been 6 months since the court gave its final ruling, and I still wake up some mornings half expecting the rug to get yanked out from under me again, like my mind doesn't totally trust that it's over, that I'm allowed to exhale now. But the truth is, life has never been quieter, more peaceful, more mine. I still live in the old house, yeah, the one that holds too many ghosts and even more memories. But now it doesn't feel like a burden, now it feels like something solid I can finally stand on without feeling like it's going to collapse beneath me. Grace ended up moving into town about a month after the road trip, not in with me. She needed her own space, but she's just 15 minutes away in this little bungalow with a red front door and a sunflower wreath she changes out for every season. And we see each other all the time, not because we feel obligated to, but because we want to, because somehow in the middle of all this wreckage we actually built something real, something we were both missing our whole lives. And she got her share of the inheritance, enough to pay off her student loans, fix up her house, and start a non-profit for adopted adults looking to connect with biological relatives, which she named Margaret's Bridge. And I cried like a baby when she told me that. I really did, because it was like a piece of our mother had found its way back into the world, just in a different form, something healing instead of hurting. And as for me, well, I kept the house, refinanced it in my name, started working part-time at the local library just to get out of the house and be around people, and I took a chunk of the money and did something I never thought I'd have the guts to do. I enrolled in nursing school. I figured if I spent all those years caring for my mom with no training, maybe it was time to turn that pain into something useful, something that could help someone else who felt forgotten or abandoned or just plain lost. And I know it sounds cheesy, but it's the first time in my life I feel like I'm not just reacting to things, I'm actually choosing, building, breathing on purpose. And yeah, Mason's still out there somewhere. He left town after the court ruling, sold his condo, moved to Florida, I heard, through a cousin who still talks to him. And no, we don't speak, we probably never will, and I've made peace with that. Some relationships don't deserve CPR. And just because someone shares your blood doesn't mean they deserve your loyalty. And I spent too many years trying to earn love from someone who only ever saw me as competition. And maybe the saddest part is that I don't even think Mason's evil. I think he's just broken in a way that makes him dangerous, selfish, entitled, like the world owes him something just for showing up. And people like that, you either spend your life trying to fix them or you finally admit that they don't want to be fixed, and you let them go. And honestly, letting him go was one of the most freeing things I've ever done. But you want to know the real twist? The part that still messes with my head a little is that about 2 months after the ruling I got a letter in the mail, no return address, just a plain white envelope with my name in careful cursive, and inside was a short note on yellowed stationery, the kind Mom used to keep in the desk drawer, and it just said, "I never stopped loving her, I just didn't know how to make it right. I hope you two find each other before I'm gone," and it wasn't signed, but I knew it was Mom's handwriting. I would have known it anywhere. And that note, it wrecked me for a while, because it made everything more complicated and more human and more heartbreaking. She wasn't a villain, not really. She was a woman who made a terrible decision and didn't know how to undo it. And yeah, maybe she gave Mason everything because she felt guilty or scared or stuck in a lie too long. And maybe she hid the money because she was trying to do one right thing at the very end. And maybe that's what life really is sometimes, a series of mistakes, covered in shame, with a few desperate attempts to fix it before we run out of time. And I don't hate her, not anymore. I don't forgive her either, not fully, but I understand her now in a way I never did when she was alive, and that's something, maybe even everything. And the best part, the part that still feels like a miracle every time I say it out loud, is that I have a sister now, not just in blood, but in heart, in soul, in choice. And we sit on the porch some nights, drinking tea and laughing about stuff that doesn't matter, like whose casserole came out better or which of us is more stubborn. And sometimes we go quiet and just look out at the yard, the way the light hits the trees at sunset, and it's like the world is saying yes, like it's nodding with us. And I never thought my life would lead here, through betrayal and lies and legal hell and emotional rubble, but it did, and I'm grateful. Truly grateful, because in the middle of all that mess, I found the one person who was missing, and now that we've got each other, we're not letting go, not ever. And maybe that's the real inheritance, not the house or the money or the furniture, but the truth, the bond, the chance to rewrite our stories together, one chapter at a time, and that, to me, is worth everything. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more crazy twists. See you in the next one.